There are dates on the calendar that are supposed to be markers of joy. New Year's Eve, Halloween, the first day of summer vacation. We mark these days with anticipation, believing they will bring memories we can cherish. But for some families, these dates do not mark a celebration. Instead, they mark a precise moment when the world tilted on its axis and someone they loved simply ceased to exist. We like to believe that if we look hard enough, every puzzle has a solution and every crime has a culprit. But the files we are about to open suggest otherwise. From the scorched riverbanks of New Zealand to the frozen waters of Mississippi, and from a highway in California to a ravine in Spain, these are the stories of the vanished, the hunted, and the mysteries that refuse to stay buried. Our journey into the unknown begins in the heat of a New Zealand summer. It was December 31st, 1998. The town of Ashburton was preparing to ring in the new year. For 15-year-old Kirsty Bentley, the day began with the innocence of teenage life. She met her friend Leanne at the library, shopped, and ate lunch at McDonald's, buzzing with excitement for her upcoming 16th birthday, just 2 weeks away. She was vibrant, happy, and by all accounts, a girl with everything to live for. After being dropped back at her home on South Street around 2:30 p.m., the afternoon took a quiet turn. Her brother, John, told her she had missed a call from her boyfriend. She tried to call him back, leaving a message, before deciding to pass the time in the way she often did, by taking the family's black Labrador, Abby, for a walk. A neighbor saw her at 3:05 p.m. walking toward the Ashburton River, a popular spot for locals to swim and walk their dogs. Kirsty was wearing a black tank top, a blue sarong with a white butterfly pattern, and black shoes. Her hair was down, which was unusual for a walking routine, but otherwise, nothing seemed amiss. That sighting at 3:05 p.m. would be the last time anyone saw Kirsty Bentley alive. When she hadn't returned by 5:15 p.m., her mother, Jill, felt an immediate, sinking dread, a mother's intuition that screamed something was wrong. The dog lead was missing from the back door. There was no note. Jill rushed to the river track, calling out for her daughter and the dog. But the only response was the silence of the bush. By evening, the search had escalated. Her father, Sid, despite suffering from a severe migraine that made him physically ill, joined the neighbors and police, scouring the riverbanks until the early hours of the morning. The next day, New Year's Day, brought a discovery that turned anxiety into horror. Searchers heard barking in a patch of dense bush. There, tied to a tree, was Abby the dog. She was dehydrated, but unharmed. But the way she was found chilled the investigators to the bone. Abby had been tied up with care, suggesting the person who did it knew the dog and how to handle her. Nearby, resting gently on top of a blackberry bush, were Kirsty's underwear and boxer shorts. They weren't torn. They weren't dirty. There was no sign of a struggle. It was as if they had been placed there deliberately, a stage scene designed to confuse the police. The absence of violence at that specific site led experts to believe that Kirsty had been taken by someone she knew or trusted, someone who could control the dog and silence the girl without a fight. For weeks, the police turned their gaze inward, focusing intensely on Kirsty's father and brother, a common strategy in such intimate crimes. They tested the family home for blood, scrutinized timelines, and picked apart inconsistencies in their stories. But nothing stuck. No forensic evidence linked the family to the crime. Years later, a retired detective inspector reviewed the case and concluded that the scene with the dog and the clothing was almost certainly theatrical, a grim tableau created to mislead the investigation. Theories swirled about a green van seen in the area, and local suspects were looked at, including a man known for cultivating cannabis near the river. But the most haunting theory remains that Kirsty was abducted, held elsewhere, and her body transported later to the Rakaya Gorge, 40 kilometers away, where she was eventually found. The killer knew the landscape. They knew the dog, and nearly 3 decades later, they are still hiding in plain sight. While the heat of the New Zealand summer hit a predator, halfway across the world, a different kind of darkness was descending on Minneapolis. It was October 31st, 2002, Halloween night. The temperature had plummeted to 24 degrees Fahrenheit, the coldest night of October in the city's history. Chris Jenkins, a 21-year-old college student and lacrosse goalie, was celebrating his first Halloween as a legal adult. He was a protector, the kind of guy who stood up for bullied neighbors, a young man with a bright future. That night, he went to the Lone Tree Bar and Grill with friends and his girlfriend, Ashley. The bar was chaotic, packed with costumed revelers. Chris was dressed as an American Indian, a costume that had no pockets. So Ashley was holding his keys, his wallet, and his phone. Around midnight, something went wrong. Accounts vary. Some say he spilled a beer, others say he intervened in a fight, but the result was that Chris was ejected from the bar. He was thrown out into the freezing Minneapolis night with nothing. No coat to shield him from the bitter cold. No money to call a cab. No phone to call for help. He was intoxicated, alone, and vulnerable. When he didn't come home the next day, a massive search began. Bloodhounds traces sent to a nearby parking garage, where drops of blood were found, suggesting a struggle or an abduction. But the trail went cold, and for 4 long months, the city held its breath. The thaw came in February. A body was spotted encased in the ice of the Mississippi River, caught in debris near a bridge. It was Chris, but the condition of his body defied the logic of an accidental drowning. Usually, the river is a brutal force. It strips victims of their clothing and shoes. Chris, however, was found with his costume perfectly intact. His slip-on loafers were still on his feet. Even more unsettling was his posture. He wasn't found face down, limbs flailing as one would expect from a drowning victim fighting for air. He was floating on his back, his arms crossed peacefully over his chest, almost as if he had been placed there. The autopsy deepened the mystery. His lungs contained very little water, a phenomenon that happens in a minority of drownings, but can also suggest he was dead before he hit the water. A tuft of his own hair was clutched in his hand. Police initially ruled it an accident, a tragic case of a drunk student falling into the river. But his parents refused to accept that. They hired private investigators, consulted hydrologists, and fought for the truth. Years later, a jailhouse informant claimed Chris had been robbed and thrown off a bridge, leading the police to reclassify the death as a homicide and issue an apology to the family. Yet, the smiley-face killer theory, the idea of a network of killers targeting college-age men, still looms over the case. To this day, no one has been charged, and the image of Chris Jenkins, floating with his arms crossed in the icy river, remains a haunting symbol of justice denied. The terror of the unknown is not always hidden in the woods or the water. Sometimes, it pursues you on the open road. In April 1991, in Sunnyvale, California, Dick Hansen and his date, a woman known only as Jean, were driving home after a night out. It was 2:30 in the morning. Hansen, a former football player and a father too, was driving his pickup truck, with Jean following in her car. But they were not alone. A 1970 Pontiac GTO, gray and fading, began to tail them. It wasn't just traffic, it was a hunt. The car mirrored Jean's every move, changing lanes when she did, speeding up and slowing down, locking onto her bumper like a guided missile. Sensing the danger, Hansen signaled for Jean to exit the highway. They pulled into a quiet residential street, hoping to lose the stalker. But the Pontiac followed, blocking Jean's car in. Hansen, protective and perhaps frustrated, got out of his truck. He walked past Jean's car and marched up to the driver's side of the Pontiac to confront the stranger. He yelled at the driver, asking what he was doing. Jean watched from her rearview mirror, paralyzed with fear. The driver didn't speak. Instead, he made a strange, deliberate gesture. He pointed at the personalized license plate on Jean's car, which read 49er Hugs. In a split second, the confrontation turned lethal. The driver raised a handgun and fired twice. Hansen collapsed, fatally wounded. The killer didn't flee immediately. In a moment of chilling calm, he stared directly at Jean through the mirror. He was a man with large, black-framed glasses. He looked at her, the only witness to his crime, and then simply drove away, disappearing into the night. The investigation hit wall after wall. Was it road rage? Was it a case of mistaken identity, with the killer confusing Hansen for a San Francisco 49ers player? Or was it something more personal? The car, a distinctive classic muscle car, should have been easy to find, yet it vanished as completely as the man who drove it. The 49er Hugs gesture remains one of the most baffling clues in true crime history, a signal that meant everything to the killer and nothing to the police. Sometimes, the victims are taken from the places they feel safest in the broad light of day. In Augusta, Georgia, in June 1994, 9-year-old Tiffany Nelson was enjoying the first Monday of her summer vacation. She was a bright, energetic girl, raised by a loving aunt after her mother's death. That morning, she hopped on her prized possession, a red 10-speed bicycle. The tires were a little flat, so she rode to a gas station just a quarter of a mile away to fill them up. Witnesses saw her there at 10 a.m., a happy child in a multicolored flower shirt and Air Jordan sneakers. It was a mundane moment, the kind that happens in every town, every day. But it was the last moment of Tiffany's life as a free child. She never came home. The search was immediate, but the police initially treated it as a runaway case, losing precious time. But Tiffany's family knew she would never run. The most perplexing detail of her disappearance was her bicycle. It wasn't a small toy. It was a full-size 10-speed. For both Tiffany and her bike to vanish without a trace suggested the abductor had a vehicle large enough to conceal them both instantly, a van or truck that could swallow a child and her bike before anyone noticed. Years dragged on. Leads dried up. A tip about a girl seen in a car with a man in a hat went nowhere. It wasn't until 2005, 11 years later, that skeletal remains were found in a shallow grave 15 miles away. The DNA confirmed it was Tiffany, but the bones could not tell the story of how she died. The advanced decomposition erased the cause of death, leaving investigators with a body but no weapon, a victim but no suspect. The disappearance of the bike remains the key, a large, physical object that evaporated along with a little girl, pointing to a killer who was prepared, efficient, and possessing the means to hide his crime in plain sight. Across the Atlantic, in Spain, a tragedy unfolded that would traumatize a nation and expose the darkest corners of human nature. In November 1992, 3 teenage girls, Miriam, Tony, and Desiree, were trying to get to a school party in a nearby town. They did what many young people in their village did. They hitchhiked. They were picked up by a white Opel Corsa containing 2 men. They never arrived at the party. For 75 days, Spain held a collective vigil. Posters of the 3 smiling girls were plastered on every wall. But the hope was shattered in January when 2 beekeepers found a shallow grave in a remote ravine. The condition of the bodies revealed a nightmare of torture and violence that is difficult to comprehend. The autopsy showed they had been bound, beaten, and assaulted with brutality that shocked even seasoned detectives. The investigation quickly identified 2 suspects, Miguel Rickett and Antonio Angles. Evidence at the scene, including a hospital slip with a relative's name, led police directly to them. Rickett was arrested and confessed, detailing a night of horror. But Antonio Angles, the ringleader, the man described as having a violent, almost demonic temper, was nowhere to be found. What followed is one of the most frustrating manhunts in history. Angles didn't just run. He seemingly evaporated. He managed to travel across Spain and into Portugal, evading a massive police dragnet. In Lisbon, he stowed away on a container ship, the City of Plymouth, bound for Ireland. He was discovered by the crew, a stowaway hiding in the dark belly of the ship. The captain locked him in a cabin, barricading the windows and door to ensure he could be handed over to the police in Dublin. But when the authorities boarded the ship, the cabin was empty. Angles had escaped again. Did he jump into the freezing waters of the Atlantic and drown? Did he have help from the crew? Or did he manage to swim to shore, using his dual nationality to flee Brazil or another safe haven? To this day, Antonio Angles remains one of Interpol's most wanted fugitives. There have been sightings, rumors, and theories, but the man who orchestrated one of Spain's most horrific crimes has never answered for it. He is a phantom, a reminder that sometimes the monsters do get away. These 5 stories, separated by time and geography, share a chilling common thread. They remind us that the line between a normal day and a nightmare is terrifyingly thin. A walk with a dog, a night out at a bar, a drive home, a bike ride, a lift at a party, ordinary actions that ended in extraordinary tragedy. The killers in these cases left behind clues that confuse rather than clarify. A stage scene with folded underwear, a body with crossed arms, a license plate taunt, a missing bicycle, an empty ship cabin. They are the loose ends that keep detectives and families awake at night. As we close these files, we are left with the uncomfortable truth that the world is vast and it is full of hiding places. And somewhere, perhaps reading a news report or walking down a street halfway across the world, there are people holding secrets that could bring peace to 5 grieving families. But until those secrets are spoken, the silence remains as deafening as the day they disappeared. The forest has always been a place where humanity seeks silence. We go there to escape the noise of the modern world, to find peace beneath the canopy of ancient trees. But there is a difference between silence and the void. There are places in the wilderness where the silence is heavy, where the shadows seem to move on their own, and where the things that watch us are not the animals we read about in textbooks. Tonight, we are opening the files on those who ventured into the unknown. From the fog-choked roads of Wisconsin to the frozen depths of Minnesota and the deep waters of New York, these are the stories of the people who came face to face with the impossible. They are stories that remind us that civilization is just a thin veneer, and just beyond the tree line, something else is waiting. Our journey begins in the bitter winter of 1974, in the small, quiet community of Frederic, Wisconsin. It was December 2nd, a night where the cold bites at the skin and the darkness comes early. 68-year-old William Bosak, a dairy farmer known for his practicality and hard work, was driving home. The time was pushing past 10 p.m., late for a man who rose with the sun. As he navigated County Road West, a thick, unnatural fog began to settle over the landscape. This wasn't just mist. It was a wall, scattering his headlights and turning the world into a gray, featureless void. William slowed his car, his eyes straining against the gloom. He was less than a mile from the sanctuary of his farm when the fog seemed to thicken, forcing him to a crawl. And then, through the swirling gray, a shape emerged on the side of the road. At first, his mind tried to rationalize it. A stalled car, a truck. But as he drew closer, the geometry was all wrong. There were no hard angles, no chrome bumpers. It was a curve, a massive, silent curve rising nearly 10 feet into the air. It looked less like a machine and more like a biological vessel, shaped like a bell jar or a bullet, tapering toward the top. And as William's car crept forward, the most chilling detail revealed itself. The object was not touching the ground. It was suspended, floating silently above the frozen shoulder of the road. The fog obscured the bottom, but the upper section was transparent, lit from within by the beams of William's own headlights. And inside this floating glass shell, there was a figure. William Bosak stared, and the figure stared back. It was humanoid, but wrong. It stood taller than any man, covered in dark, tan fur that clung to its frame like a second skin. Its face was flat, with large, protruding eyes that held a look of terrified intelligence. Ears, shaped like those of a calf, stuck out from the sides of its head. William later described the creature's expression not as aggressive, but as horrified. Its arms were raised above its head, pressed against the glass, a universal gesture of surrender. For 10 seconds, the farmer and the entity locked eyes. Two beings from different worlds, both paralyzed by fear in a Wisconsin fog. Then, the instinct for survival snapped into place. William slammed on the gas. As he sped away, the interior of his car plunged into darkness, the dashboard lights dimming, as the energy was being drained from the very air. Behind him, a soft, whooshing sound cut through the night, followed by the scrape of branches, as the vessel ascended into the sky. William didn't sleep that night, and the next morning, when he returned to the spot, he found a circular depression in the hayfield, a physical scar left by a nightmare that refused to be forgotten. But sometimes, the unknown doesn't just visit you once. Sometimes it marks you. It haunts you. We travel now to the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, to the life of Roy Sullivan, a man who became a lightning rod for the heavens. Roy was a park ranger in Shenandoah National Park, a man at home in the wilderness, but the skies seemed to have a personal vendetta against him. It began in 1942 in a fire lookout tower. A storm rolled in, and lightning struck the tower, setting it ablaze. Roy ran into the rain to escape the flames, only to be struck himself. It burned a strip down his leg and blew his toenail off. He survived, thinking it was a freak accident. He was wrong. Decades later, in 1969, the sky found him again. He was driving his truck on a mountain road. Lightning doesn't usually strike cars. The rubber tires and metal frame act as a cage. But the bolt found an open window, knocking Roy unconscious and burning off his eyebrows. The truck rolled to a stop at the edge of a cliff. 1 year later, his front yard struck in the shoulder. 2 years after that, inside a ranger station, struck in the head, setting his hair on fire. By now, Roy wasn't just unlucky, he was haunted. He began to carry a can of water with him everywhere he went. A man living in perpetual fear of clouds. He told reporters that he could smell the sulfur before it hit, that his hair would bristle, a terrifying warning that the predator above had locked onto him. The psychological toll was immense. Friends avoided him. Restaurants asked him to leave if a cloud appeared, fearing he would draw destruction down upon them. He was isolated by a force of nature that seemed intelligent, malicious. In 1973, he saw a cloud that he swore was following him. He tried outrunning his truck, but when he stepped out, the bolt came down. It set his hair on fire again, knocked off his shoe, and seared his legs. In 1976, it happened again. And finally, in 1977, while fishing, the seventh strike hit him, and as if the universe was playing a cruel joke, as he staggered back to his truck, burned and broken, a black bear emerged from the woods to attack him. Roy fought it off with a stick, a man battling nature on all fronts. 7 confirmed strikes. The odds are calculable, but they're impossible. Roy Sullivan died in 1983, not by lightning, but by his own hand. A man who had survived the wrath of the heavens 7 times, but could not survive the haunting silence that followed. We move from the lightning-scarred peaks to the damp, limestone hollows of Tennessee. The year is 1987. A woman named Cheryl, a single mother, moved to the Ruskin Cave Recreational Park for a fresh start. It was a beautiful place, with a creek winding through the property and caves carved into the earth. But beauty in the wilderness is often a mask. It started with heavy splashing in the creek at night. Then her daughter came home from a softball game, pale and trembling. She had been walking the path near the water when a massive hand reached out from the darkness, grabbing at her bag, scratching her back, and knocking her to the ground. That night, Cheryl looked out her kitchen window and saw it. A shape, massive, blocking out the light, staring in. Later, the screams began. Not the scream of a panther or a bobcat, but a deep, guttural roar that echoed off the cave walls, silencing the crickets. It was a sound of dominance, a sound of ownership. Night after night, the screams moved closer. Cheryl found footprints in the mud, prints too large for a man, too shaped for a bear. She found parallel paths flat in the grass, where someone had paced back and forth, watching the house. She visited a neighbor, an elderly woman who had lived there for 40 years. The woman showed her a journal from the 1920s, written by a surveyor. Inside was a sketch of the very things Cheryl had seen: a flat face, round eyes, bushy hair. The notes warned that these things became active in the summer, that they targeted children, that they lured them near the water. The terror culminated on a night that Cheryl would never forget. She returned home to find wet, massive footprints leading to her front door and stopping. Inside, her daughter was standing in the living room, staring at the ceiling. "It's been up there," she whispered. "It's been watching me." Above them, the access panel to the crawl space was open. Long, dark fingers were curled around the edge. The ceiling groaned under the weight of something impossibly heavy. And then, from the crawl space, a sound emerged, not a scream this time, but a chattering, a mimicking of speech, deep and garbled. They ran. As they fled to the car, Cheryl saw another face press against the window, a smaller one, and behind it, shadows moving the yard. They weren't dealing with a monster. They were dealing with a family. They drove away that night and never returned. To this day, hikers in Ruskin Cave still report the feeling of being watched and the sound of heavy splashing in the dark. The woods of North Carolina hold their own secrets. In 2007, near the Cape Fear River, a man named Chris Bledsoe went fishing with his son and 3 friends. It was supposed to be a night of bonding, of campfires and stories. It became a night of ontological shock. Chris walked away from the fire and saw them. 3 orange spheres, glowing with liquid light, hovering silently over the river. They were observing. He ran back to the camp, panic rising in his chest, only to find his son missing. When the boys stumbled out of the woods, he was white as a sheet. "I saw something," he stammered. "It wasn't human." Suddenly, the sky above them came alive. Lights converged, forming shapes, dropping down toward the riverbank. The men fled, driving their truck down the dirt road at breakneck speeds. But the phenomenon wasn't finished. Ahead of them, hovering over the asphalt, was an egg-shaped craft, brilliant white with spikes jutting from its center. It scanned the area before shooting into the sky. When Chris finally got home, he thought it was over. But the dogs began to bark, a terrified, frantic barking. He went into his backyard, and there, near the kennel, he saw it, a small being encased in a shimmering glass-like energy with glowing red eyes. It looked at him, not with malice, but with a piercing intensity, and then it vanished. Years later, the phenomena returned. Chris woke to a fire in his yard that kept reigniting despite the rain. He heard a voice command him to arise. He walked outside to find beings of light, tall and luminous. They handed him a small, rock-like object and spoke of the future, of a planetary alignment, of the Sphinx, of a new knowledge coming to humanity in the year 2026. Was it a hallucination, a dream, or was it contact? The line between the spiritual and the extraterrestrial blurred that night, leaving a man with a burden of knowledge he could barely comprehend. Sometimes, the woods do not give up their dead. In the frozen wilderness of northern Minnesota, the Boundary Waters is a place of unforgiving cold and beauty. In October 2018, 29-year-old Jordan Grider, an experienced survivalist, hiked into the snow to camp. He was seeking solitude. He found something else. He stopped responding to calls. When the Rangers found his truck, it was abandoned. A search ensued, battling deep snow and sub-zero temperatures. It wasn't until the spring thaw that they found his camp. The scene was baffling. His hammock was there, stained with blood, but there was no sign of a struggle on the ground. His sleeping bag was torn, but his gun, a 9mm Beretta, was in the hammock, fully loaded, unfired. Whatever happened to Jordan happened so fast, he couldn't reach for the weapon that was inches from his hand. His bones were scattered, picked clean. The official theory was wolves. But wolves are messy. They drag, they tear, they leave marks on the bones. And wolves don't typically attack a man in a hammock without waking him first. There were no boot prints of a man running, no casings from a gun, just a camp that had been turned into a tomb in an instant. Some whisper of the Wendigo, the spirit of hunger that stalks the northern woods. Others suggest a predator we haven't classified. But Jordan Grider remains a warning. In the deep wild, you are not the top of the food chain. In the Trinity National Forest of California, the sun was shining. It was 2008. 2 surveyors, men of science and measurement, were cataloging water sources. They were rational men who didn't believe in ghost stories. They hiked up a rocky incline to reach a creek bed. The lead surveyor froze. His partner bumped into him, annoyed, until he looked where his friend was staring. Down in the creek, standing in the water, was a figure. It was 7 feet tall, covered in smoky gray hair. It was fishing, using a stick to spear prey with practiced dexterity. The creature sensed them. It looked up. Its face was human-like, but distorted, ancient, and in its eyes, the men saw fear. It wasn't a monster hunting them. It was a being that wanted to remain hidden. It leaped from the water, slapping a massive hand against a boulder with a sound like a gunshot, propelling itself up the cliff face with impossible strength. Slap, jump, slap, jump, and then it was gone. The surveyors ran. They didn't look back. They didn't file a report. One of them transferred districts. The other refuses to speak of it. They had walked into a world that wasn't supposed to exist, a world where the legends of the Sasquatch breathed and fished and watched. Finally, we turned to the water. The year is 1899. Lake Seneca, New York. A paddle steamer, the Otishani, is crossing the lake at twilight. The captain, Carlton Herondine, sees an overturned boat ahead. He steers to assist. But the boat begins to move. It swims. As they draw closer, the boat opens its mouth. It is a creature, 25 feet long, with the head of a prehistoric reptile and a carapace like a tortoise. It has a beak full of razor-sharp teeth. The captain, acting on adrenaline, decides to ram it. The steamer accelerates. The creature dives, smart and agile. It resurfaces, and the captain turns the ship, catching the beast with a massive paddle wheel. There is a sickening thud. The ship shudders. The creature floats to the surface, its spine broken, letting out a final, dying sigh. They try to haul it aboard, hooking ropes around the massive carcass. They hoist it halfway out of the water, a dinosaur in the modern age. But the ropes slip. The weight is too great. The creature slides back into the black water and sinks 600 feet to the bottom. It was seen by a geologist, a police commissioner, a businessman. It was real, and it is still down there, rotting in the cold dark, a testament to monsters that live beneath the surface of our reality. The woods, the lakes, the skies. We map them, we pave them, we claim them. But stories like these remind us of a humbling truth. We are guests here. There are things in the fog that watch us pass. There are forces in the storm that know our names. There are giants in the caves and leviathans in the deep. So the next time you find yourself alone in the wilderness, and the silence feels a little too heavy, and the shadows seem to stretch a little too far, don't look too closely. You might just find what you're looking for.